Man, what's up? Welcome in. GC Live. Wes Mitchell here. Chris Clark hanging out here. Wednesday episode of the show. Welcome in. I see we got some folks patiently waiting already in the chat. Appreciate you joining us, whether that's on YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter, or if you're listening later on all the major podcast platforms. We certainly appreciate you joining us. Appreciate the support. And we, of course, appreciate the support of our good friend Clint Hammond. This show is always presented by Clint Hammond of the Mortgage Network. ClintHammond.com, ClintHammond.com is how you can get all the information you need on him, or 803-771-6933. Just tell Clint that you heard about him on GC Live, heard about him from the Gamecock Central guys, and he'll, of course, get you set up and sort of give you all your options if you're looking to buy a home or maybe you just want to refinance and save some money. So I appreciate Clint, as always, being our primary sponsor here on the show. Chris, Monday was more of an info jam-packed show. There's sort of an ebb and flow to these things. I think some shows there's all types of new stuff to talk about, and then some shows there's not as much new as far as newsworthy things go, but those shows also offer us an opportunity to dive back in, maybe go a little bit deeper into some other things. So I'm thinking today we're going to focus a bit on the NFL draft. That's something I sort of teased earlier this week. I've done my my elementary school math on the number of NFL draft picks that have been selected among the SEC teams the last 5 years. And then I think maybe we can go ahead and go into some recruiting, maybe some big picture stuff on what's going on in the month of June. You know, we've talked a ton about how big that month will be for South Carolina, but I think maybe worth it to dive into exactly what that means, exactly what would be going on that month, and sort of why that is so important to South Carolina and really every single school out there. So we'll also be taking your questions. If anything else pops up during the show, we'll, of course, hit that as well. But definitely a kind of a big picture show today. For you Gamecock baseball fans, of course, the game yesterday, some bad weather in the area, postponed. It's today, 4 p.m. If you're listening to this show, audio-wise, the game may be over by the time you hear it. But if you're watching us here live, about 2 hours until first pitch, SEC Network plus South Carolina facing North Florida. A little bit of a tune-up before they get back into SEC play with another massive SEC top 5 matchup, Mississippi State this weekend. So, Chris, NFL draft, and I suppose, you know, it's been a long time since I've been in a classroom, longer than I really want to admit. But I think, you know, and you people that deal with this stuff on a day-to-day basis or deal with numbers or stuff more important than sports, I believe what we had here would be called a thesis on my part.
Oh.
And today I'm going to try to support that thesis. And my thesis comes from the fact that you have a large portion, or at least a portion, of outspoken South Carolina fans, usually actually in the more casual Carolina fan category, in my opinion, not the people that are like watching every single, you know, just blow by blow, paying attention to every single recruit, paying attention to every single thing that happens within the program. But they see J.C. Horn, first-round draft pick, South Carolina Gamecocks. Javon Kinlaw, first-round draft pick, South Carolina Gamecocks. And then they say, well, the Gamecocks won 2 games last year. How does that happen? And my thesis has sort of been not that South Carolina has, like, wasted a bunch of NFL draft picks, but more so that South Carolina has to get to a point where they have more NFL draft picks because the teams they're playing most years have just as many, and a lot of cases more. Now, we can have the discussion. You can get down into the weeds of, okay, is it a development issue? You know, is it that you did recruit better and you haven't developed them into NFL draft picks? Or is it that you just have not recruited well enough, period, that has caused this to happen? But I did go through the numbers, and it kind of showed out exactly I won't say exactly the way I suspected, Chris, but very close to the way I suspected. And I've got it in a spreadsheet, and I'll be honest, I am very, very rudimentary. Is that the word? I'm not very advanced at all.
Man, these are some big words. I feel like we're in English class today.
Word of the day. My understanding of how to use Excel, or in this case, Google Sheets, is very limited. So I was scared if I sorted it, that it was going to mess up everything that I've done. So I'm hesitant on if I should actually share it or just tell y'all, because it's kind of out of order. But I went 2017 through 2021, and let's see if the perception matches the what actually happened. And no Googling, Chris. Who had the most draft picks? Easy question. This is like when your teacher gives you an easy one to start the quiz to get your confidence up. Which program has had the most draft picks from 2017 to 2021 in the SEC and total?
And I was Googling something different for another point, so not this. Alabama would have to be my pick.
Yes, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Rob, we love you too. That's if you feel that way about us, we feel that way about you, man. Yes, Alabama, obvious, and actually a very close second. And I think you'll get this one too, because we talked about it on Monday. How insane it is, how many draft picks they've had the last 2 years. So who would be number two? They had so many the last 2 years that they're actually right up there with Alabama.
Get called up, yeah. That'd have to be LSU, I would think.
Yes, LSU. So my first sort of holy you-know-what moment of this was just the consistency of Alabama, y'all.
Yeah.
2021, 10 draft picks. 2020, 9 draft picks. 2019, 10. 2018, 12. And 2017, 10. So not only Chris and everyone else do you have these amazing classes, but you have, I would say that's a sign that you actually have a balanced roster, and that you're like sort of losing a similar amount of talent and then replacing it each year. You're not sort of having it's almost in a way a sign that you're reloading, which we know they do that, but it's interesting that it's that close in the numbers where every single year they're losing about the same amount of draft talent. Now, I didn't go into first round versus sixth round. Now, I will say this, as I was counting, Alabama, my guess is Alabama has by far the most first rounders, because it was just constant. That would be another conversation, but would be interesting as well. So Alabama won. And by the way, y'all, I did SEC and Clemson. I meant to do North Carolina. Frankly, I forgot, just as like another sort of local comparison sake team. That could probably be done very quickly here during the show. Alabama with 41, LSU with 39. The next team among those schools would be, what do you think, Chris?
Alabama, LSU. And this is since 2017?
Yes. And I'm honestly feeling like I may be missing one school, to be completely honest with y'all. But I got the big ones.
I feel like Georgia's had a pretty decent run, right?
Ding, ding, ding. Georgia. Yeah. Also consistency from Georgia. Interesting, Georgia only had one in 2017. But then since 2018, they have been the model of consistency. 6 in 18, 7 in 19, 7 in 2020, and a little bump up to 9 here in 2021. So you're seeing the recruiting sort of jump. Maybe they're a little bit of a trend. It was already high, but sort of a little bit of an upward trend. And who am I missing from the SEC schools? Because I have SEC plus Clemson, so I should have one more school. Anyway, All right, so then that's where it gets interesting, and we're not going to play a guessing game the entire time because I think it's probably bad for radio or bad for podcasting or whatever we're doing. Next is Clemson with 27 in this span. After that, Auburn with 24, A&M with 21. So, my point being that, and wow, you're right. Okay, we are missing one. So, Chris, I'm gonna let you talk for a second while I add up this one. Live. This is what happens when you do things live. Is there anything surprising about what I've said so far to you?
None. And I think without having your actual spreadsheet in front of me, the teams that have the most talent typically win games and win championships. It's something we hit on in the last show, and I'm glad we're diving into it a little bit more because I want to loop recruiting rankings into this as well. But you need a blend of talent coming out of high school and then developing that talent, turning it into pro talent. If you have, look, it's not a secret and it's not a surprise. Alabama comes out this year with 10 draft picks. LSU the last year had gobs of draft picks. That was a great team. They lost a bunch of talent off of it. So there are always exceptions to the rule one way or another. But if you have a bunch of great players in the pros, high draft picks, generally those are going to be guys that are very impactful at the college level and vice versa. If you have a bunch of great college players, you're going to have a lot of great college draftees. So even the best coaches in the country, the most impactful staffs, if you're going to go win big, you're going to have the most talent. And that's what it's all about. And that's why we see a lot of times, Wes, some of the same teams in that mix. Alabama, the consistency, like you mentioned, of these teams. Now, LSU hasn't been as consistent, but they've always recruited well. Sometimes, Les Miles there, it was they couldn't figure out quarterback, and they were stuck in the Stone Ages offensively. We have seen Clemson rise from, look, it was still a program that had a national title way in the past. They had done some good things in the conference. They rose up. We see that from time to time, but a lot of times it's a lot of these other schools where, a Georgia will maybe go on a down period, which apparently under Mark Richt was 9 or 10 games was enough to get him fired. But then they'll rise up to when, hey, they're in Atlanta, they're in the playoff conversation, all those types of things. But what really stands out is, I think, what you mentioned earlier, and that was the difference, not just with draft picks. If you have a lot of draft picks, that means you're doing a good job recruiting, developing talent. But you got to remember that in a conference like the SEC, or when you even zoom out and look at South Carolina's total schedule, they're going to play the SEC teams every year, which is going to be very difficult. By the way, their West permanent opponent is Texas A&M, who's going to always recruit well, and they're getting better and better. And then they're going to play Clemson every year. So they're going to have some difficult matchups, and those are going to spill over to the recruiting ranks too. So you can't just recruit well. That'll make you a pretty solid team. If you recruit well, you're going to produce talent. But to win, and then on top of that, to win big, you have to be bringing in the type of draft picks that are very top heavy. So give you an example of that. Wes, a school that did a really good job producing talent for the NFL this year in a relative sense was Pitt. Pitt had 6 draft picks this year. Alabama had 6 in the first round. So there's your difference, right? Not only did Bama have 10, they had 6 in the first round. Pitt has 6 total, and they're all from round 3 up, right? So even if Alabama only had 6, if they were all first rounders, there's your talent disparity. When you look at recruiting rankings, right? Think back to South Carolina's 2007 recruiting class. That's the one that there were guys from that class. Really interesting, fascinating class if you sort of study it. There were guys in that class that turned out to be hits. There are definitely guys in that class that turned out to be misses. There are guys in that class that were all places in between. Maybe they outplayed the ranking a little bit. Maybe they didn't. Some guys that didn't work out, some guys that did. But it was a really talent-laden class. It was number 6 in the country, right? That year, number 6 in the country was good enough for 4th in the SEC. So that just tells you typically on a year-to-year basis that even if you're, we always say things like you want to be in the top 10 of recruiting. Very true. But what that does is just maybe pushes you into the upper echelon of your own conference. So getting into the top 10 means you're probably recruiting some 5-star type talent. But that doesn't necessarily mean you're recruiting better than most of the other people in your conference. Go back to, say, the 2020 class rankings from Rivals.com. Georgia was number 1. Clemson was 2. Alabama, LSU, Ohio State, A&M, Florida, Tennessee, Oregon, Auburn. That's your top 10. So SEC schools, Clemson, and Ohio State, and Oregon, which has a big national brand. So that's what we see. So, a lot of data points being thrown out here, but I think the main takeaway is a lot of the schools on that 2020, and I went 2 years back for no particular reason, but a lot of the schools on that team rankings list, they're on that list in the top 10 most years. And then if you match that up to their recruiting, to their draft sort of production, it's high. When you match that up to their win totals on the field, there's correlation there, right? I mean, A&M hasn't won a national title lately. I mean, but a lot of those teams have either won a title or they've been in the playoff. That helps your recruiting, but you also have to recruit that way to get there also. So it's sort of a tough space to break into, I think, is a takeaway. But if you're recruiting like that, then your draft production is going to reflect it, and your on-field product is going to reflect it.
Yeah, and I think you have a lot of these teams, as you said, it's kind of like, okay, they've been like the Alabamas, the LSUs. It's sort of been throughout this window we're talking about. Now, some of them, you're always gonna. It's kind of gonna be, unless they've done it consistently the entire time, it's kind of gonna be like a lagging indicator. So, in theory, a couple of great recruiting classes. Let's say you didn't have great recruiting classes before. A couple of great recruiting classes, in theory, if you develop them some and you sort of evaluated well, will show up in the NFL draft numbers in like 3 to 4 years. Now, in the case of Alabama, every single year, if you go back to 3 or 4 years ago, studs. With some of these schools that have been more up and down, it's kind of interesting. You can actually see, you can look at the overall numbers, but then you can sort of divide it by class and sort of see how they started to fall off at one point, or you see that they're on the rise. And by the way, y'all, I knew I was going to do this because I was doing this right before the show. Florida, I saw some people saying, Florida, what about Florida? Florida is the other school. I had Florida written down. It got deleted somehow from my row, so I had to redo them. They actually edged out Georgia in picks. So
that was going to be my next, fourth place, I guess you could say, guess.
Yeah, so you have Alabama, LSU, Florida with 33 picks in that 5-year span. Then Georgia with 30. Then Clemson with 27. Auburn with 24. Texas A&M with 21. Now, if you're a South Carolina fan, which if you're watching this or listening to this, you probably are, what you're noticing is I have not said the Gamecocks yet. And these are all teams that South Carolina plays on either every year or on a somewhat regular basis. Obviously, they don't play Alabama or LSU on a crazy regular basis, but they have played them recently.
Mm-hmm.
So you get the point we're getting to. And as you get down to sort of the more middle tier to lower tier teams in the SEC, some surprises here for me, honestly. Mississippi State has had 17 draft picks in this span. Ole Miss has had 16. Tennessee has had 13. Kentucky has had 13. South Carolina has had 12. Missouri and Arkansas have had 11. And then Vanderbilt, which is by far the lowest, has had 7. I did run the quick math on UNC. They've had 17 in that span, so 17 versus 12 for South Carolina. So Point being, to me, my thesis is that I was correct. Oh, South Carolina's had way too many draft picks. They need to be better. That's not the way to say it. The way to say it is South Carolina needs way more draft picks, and that will probably be a sign that they've been playing better. You can even look. So it's kind of interesting, Chris. If you look at this list, you can kind of go back. So like the 2017 and the 2018 classes, the draft classes, that would have been early Muschamp. It's almost a direct reflection of some of those years towards the end of Spurrier, where you could almost see the classes kind of falling off as far as difference makers go. And if you remember those early Muschamp teams, part of the reason all of us were pretty positive about what they were doing on the field was they surprised as far as the record goes. And those were very heavy freshman, sophomore-led teams. So there was not a ton. We talked about that at the time. Hey, there's not a ton of upperclassmen talent on those teams. So that's very much reflected. South Carolina did not have a single player drafted in 2017 and only had one drafted in 2018. If you look at this, the trend actually is in the right direction. It's still not where it needs to be, but 3 picks in 19, 4 in 20, and 4 in 2021. So that is a solid trend, but again, you're still lagging behind some of these other teams. The highest overall year for any one team, by the way, was last year, LSU with 14. The lowest, as I said, were some zeros. The team that honestly, man, is like the most another example that they've fallen off would be Tennessee, because it's kind of Tennessee and Kentucky, at least according to this, are on opposite trajectories as far as what they've done as far as putting out NFL talent. Kentucky in 2017 and 2018 had a combined 0 draft picks.
Yep.
Combined 0. So they went 2 years straight without having a 7th round draft pick, which is incredible for an SEC team not to have a single guy drafted. But 2019, 5 dudes, 2020, 2 dudes, and 2021, 6 guys drafted. So they had 13 during that span, but they were all in the last 3 years. So you see the upward trajectory there. Tennessee, on the other hand, let's sort of put those two things together. While Kentucky was having 0 in 2017 and 2018, Tennessee had 9 total, 6 in 17, 3 in 2018. But then Tennessee, listen to this. Who would have ever thought? Tennessee Volunteers, 0 picks in 2019, 2 in 2020, and 2 in 2021. So that's not the trajectory that you want as far as putting out talent. Now, again, this is lagging. If you put together a couple of recruiting classes, you can be right back on top. This is kind of like when you're looking at a stock and you're looking at the chart after. It's easy for you to look at the stock after the fact and be like, yo, it went up. Well, no, duh. Like, you're looking at the chart. So this is like the chart after the fact. In theory, recruiting is maybe the chart before the fact, as far as which teams may be on the rise and which teams might not be.
Yeah, and I think, Gamecock Russ made a great point. He said he missed the days when Kentucky was 2-10. They have come a long way, and that's what I mentioned. I've mentioned this numerous times on this show, that what they have done, what Mark Stoops has done at Kentucky, is very underrated. They have NFL talent. They've gotten a lot better, and so now that's a school that when you play, they're going to be. This is not the older Kentucky that you played in, 2010 or whenever it was. I mean, well, that's a bad example. They lost that year to Kentucky, but you know what I mean. That wasn't. This is not the team of old. And so when you see their draft product, you see that uptick of talent. That means they recruited better and they did a good job developing. When you look at Kentucky's current recruiting efforts, they are making a splash on the recruiting trail too. Now, we don't know what will happen with those guys, but their profile has been raised. We've seen this happen at South Carolina some. It has not been as consistent as some of the blue blood programs, but this is what South Carolina has to get back to. They have to get back to, some of those recruiting classes where maybe you sprinkle in a 5-star, but you've also got a lot of sort of depth, I guess you could say, in the class where you don't have holes, where you're nailing your 3-star, 4-star type evaluations where you've got a lot of meat on the bone in your class overall. South Carolina's not going to come out anytime soon and sign six 5-stars in a class like Alabama did last year, and then a bunch of very high 4-stars right below those guys. Not going to happen right now. What they first have to do is go out there and land some guys that maybe you wouldn't expect them to. Show progress on the field, steady build, and go out and get a difference maker here or there, and then just build it from there. That's my opinion on it. It's not going to be an overnight thing. It's going to require some patience. It's going to require maximizing what you have on the roster right now, trying to get back into position to where you're on a level playing field with some of the other schools in the conference that are similar to you, and then trying to go and take that next step. And that's what was missing from that era around, 2010 to 2013, is South Carolina was right there. They're right there. They were good enough to go play in a championship. Didn't happen for a game, because of a game each year, really. And after that, it sort of fell off to where they didn't take that next recruiting step where they can make that huge, huge splash. So I think that's what they got to get back to.
Well, and I think as we're talking about Kentucky, that unfortunately for Carolina fans, that may be sort of the blueprint.
Yep.
The patient, build a foundation, and hope as you build the foundation that you can then start to add the difference makers on top of the foundation.
Yeah.
I think that's what Kentucky did a great job of. They steadily built. Now, sometimes I think if you, let's say the Steve Spurrier model, now South Carolina ended up having to be patient with him as well, but
for sure.
You're sort of going out there and grabbing the big name coach and kind of expecting, honestly, to win right away, or you're having to go sort of the slow build route. And I think for South Carolina right now, unfortunately, that's kind of not that should be the attitude in the building. I'm not saying that at all, but right now, the reality is, you sort of are going to have to build some foundational elements here, and then hope you can sort of get that difference maker along the way. Even Clemson, y'all, it wasn't until now they were building, the trajectory was up, but it was not until you got the generational quarterback that with Deshaun Watson that it actually took off.
Right.
I mean, they were winning games, but were they in the college football playoff? Were they going to win the college football playoff? Not until they actually got that sort of just absolute transformative player who could change things up for you. So I think, and some people are talking about North Carolina. I agree wholeheartedly. A college coach told me, Chris, when Mac Brown was hired, he said, "This is not a good day for the University of South Carolina football program." He said, "Mac Brown will lock down North Carolina." And I'll be honest, I rolled my eyes at him. I thought this was just talk, this is old buddy or something. I was like, Mac Brown is this old dude coming in. There ain't no way. And what's happened? He's done a fantastic job recruiting the state of North Carolina. Now, UNC, even though they haven't necessarily won a ton, if you go back sort of before Mac, they actually have put out draft picks at a pretty good rate the last 5 years. 6 in 2017, 3 in 18, 1 in 19, 2 in 20, and 5 this year. So that's 17 draft picks for them as well. So it doesn't help that you have that to sort of deal with at the state directly to your north.
That's right. So there's some difficult things that are in place there now, just like you said, being realistic. I think, let me take it back real quick before I make this point. When you were talking about sort of that intersection of Spurrier was the one where that's the big name coach, and that's if you're a Gamecock fan in 2005, that's we're going to win big. I remember that exact moment, the UCF game in 2005 when Blake Mitchell hit Noah Whiteside on that long post pattern for a touchdown. And you could feel in the stadium, everybody thought this is the new normal. Everybody was thinking, Knowing Spurrier's background, he turned Florida from not much into a national power. He's now at South Carolina. When that happened, I'm telling you, it was palpable in the air. People thought this is what it's going to be like because they had just finished a few years of quarterback draw and all those types of things. And then that happened, and they think, yeah, this is it. Now, South Carolina ended up, what was that, like 14-3 in that game. So maybe you come back down to earth a little bit by the end of that game. But point is, it was not. It was a combination of factors. A lot of good Spurrier did, but it wasn't until a few different things, staff changeover, right? Got the right staff together. Some transcendent talents in the state of South Carolina that, to their credit, they were able to land. That helped. You don't always have that in this state. Sometimes you do, and they took advantage. Other teams being down at the beginning of Spurrier's tenure. Florida had not blossomed into the power that it became under Urban Meyer. Tennessee was down, at that time. Clemson was not a national power. So there were some things that helped them, and they also helped themselves on the way to building the program up. So now you fast forward to 2021. Well, South Carolina has had its profile lowered, right? Lowered back down from where it was in, say, 2012, sort of at the height of it. Now you got all these issues. North Carolina's one, like you mentioned, in recruiting, where typically a big part of your recruiting strategy is, we're going to go into North Carolina and sign all, some guys. North Carolina's made that tough, and then everybody in the Southeast is going to still want talent out of there. Even like you look at Georgia, Wes, and Atlanta. Atlanta's always, Atlanta, the state of Georgia, is always going to be an SEC, ACC hotbed. But now even like a school like Georgia Tech is even doing a much better job recruiting in this modern era with Jeff Collins, his marketing. Contrast that to Paul Johnson and running the option. Now Georgia Tech is tougher. Kentucky within the conference is a tougher out on the field. There's not as many head-to-head recruiting battles, but they're getting better. Clemson's elite. Georgia, has been built back up to where it's recruiting elite every year. So it's difficult right now. So that's why, we drive this home, not to, some people say, you're already making excuses, whatever. No, I think it's just important to have perspective. We don't cover Alabama to where we're sitting here saying, guys, Alabama, they've had a little bit of a tough stretch. They won 7 games the past 2 years, but it's Alabama. It'll rebound. It's a little bit different than that.
And we're not I feel like we almost have taken a negative turn here, and that's not really not what we're trying to do at all. It's just sort of, again, going back to why things have happened the way they are. And ultimately it's going to come down to recruiting and development, I think, and these are big picture things. It's much easier to sit here on a podcast and say these big picture things than it is to actually go do them. Then the question becomes, how do you do that? How do you out-recruit some of these teams you're going to have to out-recruit? How do you out-evaluate? Where can you find an edge? Is it schematic? Is it development? Is it culture? Where can you find an edge to take a step forward? And then possibly just as importantly, build on that. That was the thing South Carolina didn't do under Spurrier. Build on the most, and hopefully these people aren't listening in the car because I'm about to piss them off. They're going to drive into a ditch or something. That's the biggest missed opportunity in South Carolina football history, was not building on what was taking place during that 3 to 4 year span where South Carolina played for the East and then had an opportunity. They're 1 game away from playing for the East 3 other times. So you got to find a way first to get that opportunity back and then take advantage of it. And things are cyclical. I mean, it feels like it's going to go on forever right now, that Alabama and Clemson, with Ohio State in there, Oklahoma, that those schools are going to be in the college football playoff every other year. But it is still cyclical. It will eventually shift. But if you're South Carolina, you need to be in position to take advantage of that shift. And Chris, I think it goes back to going, in this, it's easy. Every coach says, I'm going to recruit the state. I'm going to recruit my home state. For me, for South Carolina, again, easier said than done. It is about picking the right guys to recruit in this state and finding the guys that are going to develop and going to have the potential to develop, as much as it was talked about. And there were some really successful recruiting jobs by the previous staff. I don't want for us ever to be one of these shows. This tends to happen when there's a new staff. Everything from before is now all of a sudden bad, and everything that's new is good. There was, I mean, to land Jordan Birch, to land a Zach Pickens, to battle it out and get guys like that and keep them home, very, very impressive, and keep them away from Clemson. But I think also we got to remember, recruiting is not a science. It's about picking the right in-state guys that in a lot of these cases you could have landed. I'm talking about a Jalen Hyatt at Tennessee. I'm talking, even a Jalen Moody from down in Conway, who's at Alabama right now. He's waited his turn. I think he's a senior in Alabama. I think he's been primarily a special teams guy. But if he's still at Alabama right now and is on the field in any way, you tell me he couldn't have helped South Carolina at some point in the last few years? There's no question in my mind. So, recruiting a Lavelle Davis, had a 6'7" kid who had a massive first year at Virginia. These are all kids that are very signable for South Carolina. Now, the tough part is finding out which guys are going to become that, which guys that we're talking about right now in the class of 2022, 2023 are the ones that we're going to look back on and say, wow, South Carolina should have recruited that kid. I think finding a way to better evaluate those guys is a massive key for South Carolina moving forward the next few years.
It is, and that goes down to, in-state certainly is the most important one to do it in, but nailing the evaluations of guys that you bring in, that's something that you got to do because, look, you got to win those the big recruiting battles that South Carolina won in the last few years in-state and out-of-state were definitely positive. The ones you mentioned in-state, then you got, a J.C. Horn, and you've got, Marshawn Lloyd, guys like that. Those were important, but the issue was, strictly from a recruiting front, too many misses at other spots or guys that didn't work out. Miss is either a straight-up miss or an evaluation miss, or maybe a numbers situation at certain spots. That ultimately led to lack of depth, lack of production at other spots. And so that's one thing that you got to try to avoid going forward. And again, that is a challenge in recruiting because everybody wants those types of guys. Everybody's going to, we're going to out-evaluate everybody. We're going to out-recruit everybody. But that's what it comes down to. I think for South Carolina, since I took a little bit of a negative turn earlier, here's sort of the good thing. They're in the Southeast that has a ton of football talent in it. And they also have a lot of things that they can point to. They can point to the fact that they were on the cusp not too long ago. You really do, from a facility standpoint, an academic standpoint, have everything you need. They can point to their coaching staff, past successes, level of competition they play, NFL development. There's a lot of different things that South Carolina can point to where you could sit there and make an argument as a coach that really just what they're missing from the past is that relative to other programs, just the trophy case. So then it becomes a sales job of bringing in the type of guys that want to help you fill that trophy case and fill it for the first time. And if you remember some of the guys that South Carolina recruited in that sort of golden era that we were talking about, it was the same type of sales pitch. And some of those guys bought in and they really helped turn it around. So it's going to be the same type of deal for South Carolina this time. And the good news is they do have some ammunition this time. They've also got something like early playing time right now to stack on top of all those other things.
Yeah, and beautiful new facility that I still don't think they have not gotten fair value out of their investment yet because kids have not been able to be on campus for 15 months. That will change this weekend, or this summer, I should say. I guess I'm already thinking about the weekend. It's only Wednesday, but the opportunity there to bring some guys in, let them see this place in person for the first time, see what South Carolina has to offer, and start to build some bonds. I think create some relationships. It's not just relationships with the coaching staffs. It's relationships with other players that are being recruited by the same programs as you are as a prospect. So those things will be important. And as promised, let's get into that a little bit in June. The return of official visits will be massive, but the return of camps will be arguably just as big. I'm sure there's a conversation there. I don't know which one you would say is bigger, the return of camps, the return of official visits. They're all going to be a big deal. This will, Beamer and those guys. I saw he was on the group that won the coaches' little golf tournament thing. The staff better get their golf play in now in May, because I look at May as the calm before the storm.
Yes.
Not a whole lot going on in May. Everything's kind of chill. June is going to be crazy.
Insane. Not a lot of sleeping going on. Yeah, this month, actually, the bulk of the work being done this month is going to be, continuing some remote recruiting stuff. There's a certain amount of team stuff you can do as a coach. It's just going to be getting ready, strategizing. Shane Beamer said even publicly that, they want to have guys in every day of June. So you're talking about a lot of unofficial visits. You're talking about 10 camp days. And then there's a couple really big official visit weekends sandwiched in between all that. What is it, the 11th and the 25th, I think, Wes, where they're going to have 16 to 18 guys somewhere in that vicinity coming in as of right now. And there could be more. There could be more added to that tally to where, by the time June rolls around, we may be talking about a couple official visit weekends with 20 to 25 guys coming in and high value targets of that. If you've seen the list on GamecockCentral.com that Wes has put together, keep that thing updated pretty regularly. There's some impressive names on there at some need positions for South Carolina.
Yeah, and I think every position is a bit of a need position, but certainly at some spots that are needed even more for South Carolina moving forward. Yep. And that's where, and I don't want to be a broken record here, but I do think getting Braden Davis in the mix, officially on the commitment list, and now having opportunity, maybe you get him in for a weekend or two as well and let him meet some of these kids. That's massive for South Carolina. And I believe my impression is that internally, that's not just our belief, that's their belief internally, that, hey, we got to get a quarterback in order to try to build this offensive class around. It's very difficult to do. Stepp has them in the game for some really talented receivers. He'll get his guys. He kind of always has, but it certainly helps when they sort of know who's coming in with them at the quarterback spot. And, by the way, shout out to this kid, CJ Smith. Did you see this, Chris? Ran a 10.28 in the 100-meter dash. I think that was this past weekend. He's a receiver down in Orlando that South Carolina is chasing, and very much involved. He'll be one of the June official visitors. Competition is tough. Lots of good schools in on him, some in-state schools that are after him. But the fact that he can play football and run track at South Carolina, that other guys have done the same thing and had success doing that. I would dare say, Chris, if South Carolina could pull him off, it'd be like the fastest player South Carolina has landed on the football team probably since Demir Bird. Is that fair? Is there somebody I'm forgetting in between there?
Yeah, maybe a Levante Valentine who has popped in on the show from time to time. So yeah, the guy can scoot. When you watch the 10, hearing about a 10.28, you're like, yeah, that's moving. You see the video of it. He makes everybody else like they're walking on the thing. So he can really scoot. That's a big one. Really, there's talent at multiple spots. Good backs coming in, really good backs. Some really high-value offensive linemen like Ryan Brubaker from Pennsylvania. I look at DB. Again, I'm sort of hung up on DB right now because, in my opinion, that's the biggest need spot on this entire team in the short and the long term. You look at short and long term, it's the biggest one for me. And so you've got playing time to sell. Torian Gray's got a good track record. You've said this a lot, Wes. He's tended to, sort of like Stepp has his stops, Torian Gray's tended to get his guys. Florida, Virginia Tech, he did a stellar job there. He's been in the NFL, played in the NFL. He's got a good track record. So he has several really talented defensive backs coming in this summer already. I think there's 4 or 5 of them that are, near the top of South Carolina's board that are already planning on coming in, and the list could actually grow for our subscribers, got a piece on the front page and on the forum right now. Gamecock Central is sort of a breakdown of the entire DB board, where things stand, several guys to know. So go check that out if you're a subscriber. Yes, Rob giving me a hard time. Wes already makes fun of me. Want to turn everybody into a DB. I'm just saying, man.
Chris is hung up on DBs. I tend to get hung up on wide receivers. I don't know why. I love talking receivers. I watch more film of wide receivers than any other spot. And then Chris wants to take any wide receiver that I like and turn them into a DB. So that's just how things kind of go around here. But they do need some DBs and they need some wide receivers. So
they do.
Hey, Chris, our spots have been underperforming. It appears that we need to step it up a little bit.
Yes, we do.
But yeah, we'll see. I think those spots are in really good hands for the future as far as getting some guys in here. It'll take a little bit of time, but I think they are in a good spot. And then, so on top of all these official visits, which again, first time in like 15 months, the Russ says, throw it to the tight end. I do think whoever calls in to the call-in show and asks about tight ends every time, I don't think they're gonna be able to do that this year. Like I'm all in on this whole 5 tight end offense. Just put them all out there at the same time, which you could literally do that if you had Jaheim Bell in the backfield or this year. So you know what? I think just as big as the officials are going to be the chance to get it back out there for camps. Chris, we see it every year. There are guys that are sort of known within maybe coaching staffs, but just don't have a name out there as far as recruiting goes yet, or that a staff is sort of saying, hey, I kind of like this guy, but I need to see this. I need to see that. I want to see him run a 40. I want to work with him in person. Is he as big as we think he is, et cetera, et cetera. I would almost think there may be even more camp offers this year than ever before, not even just at South Carolina, just in general, because it's going to be the first chance for these schools to see these kids in person. And it's going to be more important than ever to be organized going into these and making sure you put eyeballs on every single kid while they're on your campus.
Yeah, lots of board shuffling this year, right? Because, offers have continued to go out at a pretty good pace for the schools that typically throw out a decent amount of offers. And, they've had to use different methods. They've had to rely even more on high school coaches, or we've seen prospects do things like, tweet out pictures of the scale that they're standing on, to verify height. It's sort of changed the game. But to a degree, you still want to see a guy move in person. Even if you've got all the measurables in front of you, got the film, you still want to see, like you said, work with him, see how he can move, see how coachable he is. So for some of these schools, probably South Carolina included, they're going to see some guys even in this 2022 class that maybe they've offered, and they're either going to say, he checks out, hey, we need to prioritize this guy even more, or whoops, and drop him down. That happens every year that we've been covering camps. We've seen that happen. We've seen it unfold right there in front of us on the field, even sometimes. We're going to see, I think, even more of that this time. But you think about even going forward from this class, lots of 23 prospects, lots of 24 prospects. They're going to be itching to get out there. And so I'd imagine we're going to see a decent amount of offers dispensed, from the next few classes as well.
We've seen, Chris, a kid literally lose an offer for having a bad attitude at camp, for just like not carrying himself well.
It was a span. It's about like a 1 minute span.
Yeah.
Offered, no offer. Yeah.
And I didn't even really think the kid did anything that egregious. Like I was just like, oh, what? Like, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Over. But yeah, we have seen that happen. So it does happen. Camps are important. Rob in the chat says as soon as his subscription elsewhere ends, he's getting a GC subscription. That wifey will not let him have both. Rob, shoot me an email, man. Wes at GamecockCentral.com. We'll try to work something out for you there, man. Appreciate the kind words you've had today. What else do we want to hit, Chris? I think that's about all I got, man. Baseball team needs to win today. I think they will, obviously. But more importantly, they need to win a couple games this weekend.
Yeah, they do. Another another weekend, another big series. Disappointing result last week, obviously. But when you're facing the competition level that they're typically facing, every single weekend, I don't know that you can be shocked by any result. With how well this team's played, but also at times we've seen some struggles. You see some elite competition. Those can be magnified. They can be amplified, and I think that's what we saw against Ole Miss. Didn't play extremely well, but Ole Miss, very good team as well. So yeah, need to come out and we talked with Colin Taylor about it the other week, last week before the series against Ole Miss, and sort of my question to him was, how much does this sort of change the equation for South Carolina if they go out and they sweep or they get swept? And he thought it was a fairly significant thing. So need to get back on the right track, obviously against North Florida, and then to the next few SEC series as well.
Well, and here's the thing. The interesting thing about that matchup is that going into the Ole Miss series, South Carolina and Ole Miss were both right at the border for a top 16 seed, which makes you a host. Well, going in, South Carolina was right at the edge on the right side of it. Ole Miss was right at the edge on the wrong side of it. So if you get swept by a team that's sort of right there on the bubble, it kind of flips. So right now I saw the D1 baseball projections came out, and those guys, credit where it's due. D1 baseball, outstanding job covering college baseball. They actually go in depth with college baseball on a national level, on SEC level, do a really good job. They now have South Carolina as a 2 seed. So you built a cushion if you're South Carolina during the first half of SEC play. Getting swept by Ole Miss completely eliminated the cushion, unfortunately.
Yep.
So now you go into this week, it can flip right back. This is at home. If you win 2 of 3, it flips right back, and you're a host, and your RPI goes up again, and then you have another opportunity to beat Clemson and get a sweep of them for the entire series this season. You actually have a really talented, really productive midweek starter, so I think that gives you a chance against Clemson moving forward. We'll see what happens. It can turn back.
It can.
But right now, the trend is not what you're wanting. The trend is not positive for South Carolina. So we'll see if they can flip this thing back and get back on the right track this weekend against Mississippi State. I'm sure we'll try to get Colin on to join us on Friday. I may be doing the show riding down the road with my phone up because I'm going to the Braves game on Friday. I have not told Chris that until right now, but obviously we'll try to get Colin on, and we're still working on a certain new-ish South Carolina commitment that we're trying to get on as well. So maybe we can get that done on Friday. We're working multiple angles on this one, so we'll see what happens. But
we're gonna give our best efforts, man. Yeah, the Braves game, jealous of that a little bit. We missed our opportunity when we were there. We had a plan. It was a great plan. They ruined it. The Braves ruined it. The weather, I guess, kind of ruined it. And to add to the torture, it seems like every time I turn on the TV, I've got YouTube TV. Shout out, free sponsors, free ad for them. The Atlanta United games keep coming on. So we got to get there sometime soon as well. MLS, of course, the tie-in with the University of South Carolina now. We got to get to the United game, get some cheap concessions, check out a little soccer, get you a little bit more indoctrinated there to some soccer. Yeah, you'll like it. It'll be fun.
I don't know, man. They have cheap concessions, but the tickets for soccer are expensive.
They cover it with the tickets. That was so funny because we're driving to Atlanta for Rivals Camp. And
so Chris and I were driving down there last weekend, not this weekend that just happened, the weekend before that. Chris and I going to Atlanta. We went down on Saturday. We're like, man, we could see the Braves. We could see the United. What are they called? Are all soccer teams called United? Like what?
No, they're not. There's a few, but they're not.
Why do they have the same name?
They don't. Some of them do.
But why do some of them have the same name? I don't understand this. Like, isn't it Charlotte United?
There's multiple pro teams with the name, the Tigers or the Bears or whatever. I mean, it's sort of similar to that. Some of them are FC, which stands for football club. Some of them are United. Some of them are something totally separate, like the name of their city. But some of them, MLS, you have some United, you have some FCs, and then you have like the Seattle Sounders, for instance. So you have like a more traditional mascot, or not a mascot, but a team name.
Okay.
So, yeah.
All right. John says no soccer coverage, please.
Yeah, John's about to bounce out of the show.
What music do we listen to on the trips, Chris?
We didn't listen to any music. We were doing a lot of business talk on the way there and back, and then
we listened to some podcasts.
And we just chatted it up for the rest of the time.
Yeah, we chatted a long time, talked business.
Sometimes when I drive, I'll put on some music sometimes, but it's generally a music list. We have a lot of like catching up. We use the rides to catch up on some things, I think.
Yeah, this was a big business catch up trip. Trying to think. So we went down. Baseball game got postponed to the next day, which actually was good. We didn't go because they got hammered on Sunday, which would have been the game. We would have been out of Saturday. And the soccer tickets, as the day went on, got more and more and more expensive. And we were like, forget that. So we went out, had some food, had a nice dinner, and then went to the camp on Sunday. But what else? What was I about to say? I was about to add something to this conversation. Oh, Crime Junkie podcast. And
that was it.
Who's the former Ohio State coach that we didn't listen to it this time? We used to listen to the podcast.
Oh yeah, Zach Smith.
Smith.
Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, that guy was crazy. We listened to that on one of the long trips. Laughed about that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there are any other good podcasts that we listen to.
GC.
Yeah. Listen to ourselves.
We don't
be awful.
Yeah.
Nathan wants to know, when things open back up, are there any plans for the public to take tours of the football facilities? Before all this happened, they were giving away tours, I think, before games. I don't know exactly how you set that up. I would imagine, Nathan, that it's just going to depend on the vibe. Like, is everything literally open in the fall, or is everything open but there are still some little things put in place? I don't know. I would imagine that at some point you want to be able to give some people tours of that thing again and let them see sort of the investment into that program. So we'll see. But I don't have an actual answer there for you. And I doubt anybody over there has an answer either. That's probably something that will be answered a little bit later. But at some point, I'd imagine you'd be able to get in there and see it and check it out. We have not been in that facility. We've been to the outside part, but we haven't been in that facility since I don't know how long.
Yeah.
Because everything's been Zoom, or, we've been to the outdoor practices a little bit. So anyway, all right, y'all, I think that's it. I think we're done drawing it on here. But for Chris, I'm Wes. We'll be back on Friday, or Chris will be back on Friday. I might be back on Friday too. But I hope y'all have a great night. Hope you have a great Thursday, and we'll see you all then. Have a good